What we are going to talk about is the duty to refer, which is if you are a charity or any other organisation that is working with children or protected adults, then under the PVG legislation, you have a legal requirement to pass on information to the PVG barring lists if the relevant criteria are met. That being, if somebody has behaved in an inappropriate fashion towards a vulnerable individual or individuals within your group. Now, at present, there are round about 5,700 people across the country who are barred from doing the regulated work with vulnerable individuals. As you see there, we've got it split into 3 different sections. The red section, the biggest part there, is 64% of 5,700 people are barred from working with children. It is therefore an offence for you as an organisation to employ any of those individuals in a position that falls under the PVG scheme that is working with children. Same way there, 9.5% are barred from working with adults. You cannot employ individuals who are barred from working with adults in an adult position that falls under the PVG scheme. And there you've got 26.5% are barred from working with both children and adults within the PVG scheme. So they cannot do any regulated work at all under PVG. But for the system to work, for people to be put on to these barring lists, as we say, it is a legal requirement for you, if you are an organisation that is doing the work, to pass on information if the criteria are met. That being, first off, the individual is permanently removed from the regulated work that they have been doing. Now, that can be you as an organisation dismiss them, that can be they resign, that can be, particularly sort of in the charitable sector, the funding for a project ends and they leave. For whatever reason, if they have been permanently removed from the regulated work, that's the first part of the criteria. The second part there being that the grounds have been met, those grounds being that they have behaved in an inappropriate fashion in one or more of the 5 headings there towards vulnerable individuals. So they have, for example, physically caused them harm. They have placed somebody at risk of harm through, for example, a lack of health and safety. They have engaged in inappropriate conduct involving pornography. They have engaged in inappropriate sexual conduct. They've been saying things of a sexual nature to vulnerable individuals that you would not want them to do. They have also been, for example, giving inappropriate medical treatment. So if any of you are involved in organisations where it is involved, for example, giving out medication to individuals at certain times, somebody who refuses to give out that medication would be classed as being behaving in an inappropriate fashion. Can also cover, for example, the supply of illegal and unauthorised drugs. Now, what is deemed to be inappropriate behaviour? We've got a list there, so we're starting off with the more serious items: sexual abuse, physical assault, supplying the illegal or unauthorised drugs, emotional abuse, coercion, neglect, inappropriate physical restraint, as we said, failure to follow health and safety, the use of inappropriate language. You're working with vulnerable individuals. What you deem to be inappropriate within the 5 headings is going to fall down to who you're working with in terms of the vulnerable individuals and what work your staff, your volunteers are doing with those individuals. And if they are behaving in an inappropriate fashion and you do permanently remove them, then, as we say, you are legally required to pass on the information to the PVG system. So that inappropriate behaviour, though, it has to be against children, it has to be against protected adults. So I keep picking on David here when I'm doing these, so he's been doing a wide selection of criminal offences over the past few weeks, it has to be said. So David earlier was talking about, you know, OSCR gets its funding from the Scottish Government. So tomorrow, OSCR finds out David spent all the money on his, you know, holidays in the Caribbean. You know, OSCR wouldn't have to pass that information to the PVG system because David's not doing work with children with protected adults. But if David was the head, let's say, of an adult project for people with dementia and he siphoned money from those individuals to fund his holidays, then if the organisation removes them, that would be a referral ground, because that is inappropriate behaviour towards a vulnerable adult. He has, for example, neglected that person's need by using money that was for their care to spend on his trip to the Caribbean. You're not planning on going to the Caribbean, we have to say at this point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The other thing about the inappropriate behaviour is it also doesn't have to be whilst the person is actually working for you. If you decide to remove an individual from the work that they are doing with you with vulnerable individuals because information has been passed to you about their general behaviour, let's say outside of work, then you can remove that individual and refer them to the PVG scheme. So, for example, we'll go with Jude this time. Somebody comes to you tomorrow and says, did you know Jude's been arrested for hitting a child, on Princes Street? And we said, oh, no, didn't know that. We're a children's organisation. We discover that Jude has actually been arrested and charged with hitting a child, assaulting a child. If we then remove her, even though the inappropriate behaviour hasn't been while she's been physically working for us, the referral grounds are still met. You still have to make the referral because that removal has been caused by her being inappropriate towards a vulnerable individual. Allegedly. We should say, yes. We should, well, don't know about that. An individual who you are reporting to the PVG system, we should say at this point, there does not have to be a conviction through a court of law for that person to be barred and placed on the barred list under the PVG system. The PVG system is working on the basis that the individual is going to be barred on the balance of probability that they have behaved, inappropriately towards a vulnerable person. So there doesn't have to be a situation arising where you dismiss the individual and pass that information on to the police for them to take it through the courts, etc. It is just if you remove the individual, because as we got there at the bottom, the use of inappropriate language. So I don't know if any of you are, for example, sports organisations. If you've got a coach who's continually swearing at the children that he's coaching, you might say, nope, we're going to remove you. That would be a referral matter under the PVG system, but you wouldn't have to pass that on to the police. Other side of that as well is you should not rely, if it is a police matter, on giving the information to the police and then passing it to the PVG system. If that individual does end up being barred through a court process, etc., then Andrew, who's from Disclosure Scotland at the back there, and his colleagues, they will look at the system to see whether or not you as an organisation have placed a referral into the system because you are legally required to do so. So no matter what the circumstances, if the criteria are met, you should make the referral to the PVG system. Now, something that does come up from time to time, what if information is passed to you and the individual has already left your organisation? They've already gone. Somebody who's, in receipt of your services, didn't want to say anything because they were being bullied by a staff member, by a volunteer. If that person is gone, allegations are made, you investigate that allegation, and if your conclusion is that at the end of your investigation you would have removed that person if they were still working for you, then you are still legally required to make the referral to the barring lists, even though the person is no longer there. And that's sort of questions bit. I will now answer the question at the front there, which was, are you required to do the PVG checks?
I was actually saying, to what extent are charities required to put in PVG certification?
Right. This may come as a shock to some individuals here. Technically, it is not a legal requirement to do a PVG check. Under the current PVG legislation, it is effectively your decision as an organisation as to who you would PVG check and when you would PVG check them. However, we do have to say that if you are found, for example, to be employing a barred individual, then technically you could be in breach of the PVG legislation, and the only way you can find out if an individual is barred is by doing a PVG check. So technically it's not a mandatory system, but if you like, it's sort of mandatory by the back door. And we should say at this point that the PVG legislation, for those of you who know, it was out for public consultation earlier in the year about making changes to the system, and part of those changes are that come the implementation of the amendments, hopefully in 2020, the PVG system will become mandatory at that point. So if you are doing what's currently regulated work and what may be protected roles going forward, then you will be legally required to do the checks for everybody who does meet the criteria.